The message stays unread, not because it wasn't seen, but because opening it would confirm something. Outside, rain gathers on the glass. The room is silent, except for the faint hum of a refrigerator. He leans back in his chair, smirks, whispers to no one. Love is a chemical illusion. And still, the phone remains face up. There's a particular tone people use when they say they don't believe in love anymore. It's light, almost amused, like someone describing a childhood superstition. They roll their eyes gently, smile without warmth, change the subject before anyone looks too closely. They say it casually, but not accidentally, because it wasn't love they stopped believing in. It was safety. And something inside them knows that admitting this would hurt more than the breakup ever did. So they choose the easier sentence. Love is a lie. You've heard them say it. Maybe you are them. The one who dismantles romance with logic. The one who reduces devotion to neurochemistry. The one who calls vulnerability poor judgment. They speak as if they've evolved past it. But evolution does not feel this defensive. Something happened, something that forced the heart to negotiate with survival. And survival won, but not cleanly. Because what survives is not always what heals. They didn't become cynical overnight. It happened gradually, after promises bent, after hope required too much explanation. At first, they tried to understand it. They analyzed the relationship, replayed conversations, looked for logical cracks. If they could explain the pain, they could control it. If they could reduce love to variables, they could avoid randomness, so they built a framework. Love is projection, attachment is dependency, desire is chemical, forever is statistically unlikely. They said it calmly, and every time they did, they felt safer. But safety built on denial has a strange echo. It doesn't silence longing. It compresses it. You can hear it in the pauses between their jokes, in the way their voice lowers when the topic shifts unexpectedly, in the way they study other couples while pretending not to. They speak with irony, but their eyes hesitate, because irony is distance, and distance feels like control. But control is not the same as indifference, and that's the fracture. The empathic cynic does not lack feeling. They drown in it. That is precisely the problem. They learned early that intensity is dangerous, that caring too much invites imbalance, that loyalty is rarely reciprocal, that transparency can be weaponized. So they adapted. They didn't stop valuing love. They demoted it, placed it under reason, under skepticism, under narrative. They became articulate about disappointment. They could explain attachment styles, break down behavioral patterns, predict emotional cycles before they formed. But explanation is not immunity. Underneath the analysis, something remained unprocessed. Not anger, grief. Grief that was never allowed to be pure. Because to grieve fully would mean admitting it mattered. And if it mattered, then it still does. So they converted grief into commentary. They turned heartbreak into philosophy. They built entire identities around detachment. And people admired them for it. So composed, so rational, so unbothered. But composure is not the absence of longing. It is the management of it. Watch closely. They say love is unrealistic, yet they memorize small gestures. They dismiss romance, yet they remember the exact way someone once said their name. They mock grand declarations, yet they reread old messages at 2 a.m. They insist they are over it, yet they still imagine a version of the future where someone understands them without effort. There is a hidden tenderness beneath every sarcastic remark, a quiet fidelity beneath every cynical theory. This is not hypocrisy, it is fragmentation, because part of them still believes, and the other part refuses to be humiliated again. So they split. One voice speaks in irony, the other waits in silence. And the waiting is the most honest part. They tell themselves they are realistic, but realism does not scan rooms for one particular presence. Realism does not hesitate before pressing send. Realism does not feel threatened by the possibility of something beautiful. What they fear is not illusion, it is exposure. To love again means risking the narrative they built to survive. If love is possible, then their cynicism was a shield, not truth. And shields are hardest to drop when they worked. For a while. But survival strategies have expiration dates. Eventually, detachment becomes loneliness. Irony becomes isolation. Analysis becomes exhaustion. And one night, quietly, the thought slips in. What if I was protecting myself from something that was never the enemy? That thought is dangerous because it destabilizes the entire architecture. If love is not a lie, then the real betrayal was not external. It was the moment they stopped trusting their own longing. And longing does not disappear. It waits. In subtle ways. In how they soften around certain songs. In how they linger in conversations that feel safe. In how they light up when someone speaks gently. They notice. Then they correct themselves. Don't romanticize it. Stay grounded. Don't overinterpret. But grounding becomes suppression when feeling is dismissed before it forms. The empathic cynic is not cold. They are careful. Careful with hope. Careful with desire. Careful with anyone who sees too much. Because being seen, without armor, is the original wound. And they remember it vividly. Not the event, the sensation. The moment when trust turned into imbalance. When devotion felt asymmetrical. When vulnerability echoed back as indifference. That moment redefined love, not as connection, but as risk. So now they minimize it. They reduce it to biology, to cultural narrative, to psychological projection. They deconstruct it before it can deconstruct them. But here is the fracture again. You do not dismantle something unless it once held power over you. You do not argue against love unless some part of you still feels its gravity. And gravity does not vanish because you renamed it. It waits. Every empathic cynic has a private contradiction. They say they are fine alone, yet they build entire inner worlds around a person who hasn't arrived. They claim relationships are limiting, yet they crave one connection that feels limitless. They insist they don't need reassurance, yet one sincere sentence can undo months of detachment. They say love is transactional, yet they would give endlessly if they believed it was safe. That is the part they hide, not the intellect, the devotion. Because devotion without reciprocity was the original collapse. So now they ration their tenderness, offer fragments, test reactions, retreat quickly. They appear emotionally elusive, but internally, they are watching carefully, measuring tone, consistency, energy shifts. They are not disengaged, they are scanning. Because if love is real, it must prove itself. And if it proves itself, then the wall becomes unnecessary. And if the wall becomes unnecessary, they will have to feel everything again. Not just affection, need, hope, dependency, desire without irony. That is the true fear, not love. Exposure without exit. At some point, the empathic cynic realizes something subtle. Their logic never erased longing, it only postponed it. And postponed longing does not shrink, it deepens. It becomes quieter, more refined, less dramatic, but more persistent. They begin to see it in themselves, in how they soften around authenticity, in how they resent superficiality more than they admit, in how they secretly admire those who risk openly. They call them naive. But the word carries envy, because bravery in love is something they once had, before it cost them. The tragedy is not that they stopped believing. It is that they still believe, but only in silence. And silence corrodes devotion, not loudly, gradually, until even they begin to question whether the softness they feel is weakness. It isn't. It never was. It was simply unguarded, and being unguarded, without mutual protection, creates trauma. So they armored the heart with intellect, and intellect did its job. It preserved dignity. It prevented repetition. It avoided humiliation. But it also filtered possibility, because love cannot enter through a door labeled "prove yourself." It enters where there is risk, and risk is precisely what they optimized against. So they stand at the threshold, not inside, not outside, critiquing the architecture, while secretly hoping someone will stay long enough to make the door unnecessary. There is a shift that happens quietly. It is not dramatic. It is not a declaration. It is simply this: they stop arguing against love so loudly. They don't announce it. They don't change their language immediately, but something softens. They begin to tolerate the possibility without dismantling it instantly. They allow conversations to linger without converting them into analysis. They let someone see one layer deeper without deflecting with humor. And it feels unstable, because identity was built around detachment. And now detachment feels heavy. They are not ready to say they believe again, but they are no longer certain. That disbelief protects them. That uncertainty is sacred because it is honest. And honesty, for the empathic cynic, is always inward first. They will not make grand gestures. They will not confess dramatically. They will simply hesitate less. Pause before dismissing. Listen without preparing a counterpoint. Allow tenderness to remain uncorrected. That is how belief returns, not as fireworks, as permission. But here is the final paradox. Even when they reopen, they will never love naively again. And that is not failure, it is integration. They will love with awareness, with discernment, with boundaries, but also with depth. Because the capacity never left. It was never the problem. The problem was pain, without safety. And safety, when mutual, does not require irony. It requires presence. The empathic cynic does not need proof that love exists. They need evidence that it can be reciprocal. And when they see it, really see it, the cynicism dissolves quietly, not into fantasy, into steadiness. But even then, a part of them will remain cautious. Not because they doubt love, because they remember loss. And memory does not vanish when healing begins. It simply stops controlling. The phone is still face up. The message eventually gets opened. Not immediately, but not ignored forever. Outside, the rain has stopped. The room feels different. Not warmer, just less defended. He reads the words slowly. No analysis, no immediate conclusion, just a breath that lasts longer than usual. He does not say love is a lie tonight. He does not say it is real either. He simply does not argue. And for the first time in a long time, that feels like something. Not certainty, not resolution, just a quiet space where longing is no longer treated as a threat. The window remains open, not wide, just enough.